Hello, welcome back to PLSQL tutorial. In this tutorial, we are continuing to discuss the last part of the exception handling. So essentially what we discussed before is that there are two types of exception. One is implicit, which Oracle will automatically raise. Another is explicit, which user needs to raise. And there are two types of implicit. One is predefined Oracle server error. And another thing is that you have to define yourself by using pragma init exception, right? So these two we have already discussed in our previous videos. So now let's try to see why we need user defined exception. All right. So basically PLSQL gives you ability to define your exception and raise the exception when you need. Okay. So what we have seen, like in case of implicit exception, Oracle will automatically raise that exception when it hits a particular error, right? So that is what we have, two types of exception. One is predefined, another is non-predefined. Well, so in predefined PLSQL exception, you don't have to declare anything. It's just there are 20 to 21, 20 plus normal errors are being trapped by using predefined exception, which Oracle does it automatically. But whereas for other errors, you have to declare an exception and you associate that exception to a particular error, and whenever that error will occur, Oracle will automatically raise that exception. However, the other type of exception that we are discussing right now is explicit exception, or we call it user defined exception. Okay, so in this case what you do, first thing that you declare, and then you raise the exception based on some condition and you handle the exception. Okay, the main difference between these two category of exception and this category of exception is that it will not automatically be raised. You have to raise it, the user have to raise it depending on particular condition. So let's take an example how we are going to do that. In this case, this is a sample code where we are selecting salary into a variable called v underscore sal for a particular employee number. Then we declare an exception. That exception name is called e underscore high underscore sal, which exception, right? The same way that you declare a variable, you declare an exception in line number 5 that e underscore high underscore sal is exception. Then what you are trying to do here, in line number 10 we have an if condition. If the v sal is more than 2000, then raise this exception, okay, by a keyword called raise. Okay, by using this keyword raise, we raise this exception in line number 11. So what happens in line number 11? When you raise this exception, the control goes directly to the exception block and try to find out if there is a handler written something called e underscore high underscore sal. Indeed, we have written something called e underscore high underscore sal in this thing. Hence, the control is going to resume from this line onwards. Okay, so this is how we raise. So basically, this is the example of a user defined exception. We define this here and we raise it here. However, you can always argue that why you are doing using this exception when this kind of logic can be very easily done using just if block. So if by using this if block, you can just say this, basically the goal here is to print this output put line that salary is already high, therefore I don't want to give you any hike, right? So if that is the logic, then you can always handle that part of logic by using if and else block. Then why are you doing exception, using this exception mechanism? Well, in this simple example, it's fine to have a if and else condition. However, by when the things are a little bit complicated, using multiple begin and end block, it makes sense to use this technique. And also I just want to tell you, like, you don't really need to raise an exception and all this thing. You can always handle the code by using a if and else statement. But what this exception, user defined exception, gives you a ability to write an elegant maintainable code. Okay, so why don't you just take some more example how this happen. So let's say this is an example here. What we have done, we have a begin and end block, and this is the inner block, and we have an outer block. Okay, so what I do, we raise an exception A. So whenever we raise an exception A, it goes and try to find out the exception handler of that inner block and see if we have an handler. Yes, indeed we have a handler because we have written when A, right? So if you since when A, therefore this exception handled here, and then the execution now complete for this begin and end block, and the control moves to the next next execution part of the next begin and end. So in this case, like if you want to do this if and else if, like for example whatever we have here, again like you have to make another if and else, right? So this is kind of not elegant. So by using this raise, you just go directly to this. Basically you control instead of basically you like in you do not have to traverse to this piece of code, just immediately go to this point. Okay, so that is what the salary hike, whatever example, if the salary is high, then just exit out from here and then do somewhere else. Okay, this is one example. This is one like multiple begin and end, and that's what is gives you this ability to move. Let's take one more example. Same block, but if the value of x is equal to 2, then we are raising b. But if we raise b, then we would like to see in the exception block of this begin and end, try to see if you have a handler b. Unfortunately, you do not have any handler b. Then what is going to happen? The exception is going to propagate to the next block. So next block means this is the outer block begin and end. Then it is going to try to see if we have an handler in that begin and end block. There should be an exception block if we have a handler, and in fact we have a handler. Therefore in this case when b, we are going to execute this piece of code and then exit out of this end loop. So in this example, we propagate the exception to the outer block and we handle that exception in the outer block. Okay, so here is another example. In this example we are raising c, right? If you are raising c, look, we do not have any exception handler for c in the inner block. Then we move and try to see if the outer block has an exception handler. Actually it don't have anything for c, so therefore in this case the program will exit with error. Okay, so here is the idea. The reason that I want to show you all this thing is to appreciate by using this user defined exception how clearly you are moving from one to another block. That would not have been possible just by writing if and else block, because if and else block will always going to make sure that if you want to write an if else block, then still we're going to continue. Okay, we'll continue the logic. Okay, so that is where whenever we have whenever we have complicated scenarios like this, we can use user defined exception to get rid of this complication and write an elegant code. Having said that, I can always write instead of user defined exception even whatever the code clumsiness and whatever the whatever bad code it is, but still by putting this if and else condition, I can still continue to write without using user defined exception. So now let's do a quick summary of exception handling. So we have two types of exception. One is implicit, that is Oracle will do, you don't have to do anything. Oracle will automatically raise the exception. And there are, out of this implicit, there are two types of implicit exceptions. One is predefined Oracle server errors. That means whatever frequently occurring errors, Oracle has already defined an exception, declared an exception, and then will raise that exception. You just need to just handle that exception properly. Example, 2_many_rows. That means if your select statement is going to give you more than one row and you are trying to select into a variable, a scalar variable, then in that case this is going to give me too many row exception. So what I need to write in the exception block, I need to have something called 2_many_rows, and then I write the statements. So in that case, the block, the control is going to come to the when too many rows and then going to be executed. Well, so these are the 20 plus or 20 to 25 exception that is handled like this. But there are still many other errors can come which Oracle didn't give you a predefined set of exceptions. So in that case, what you do, you declare an exception, declare, and then you associate that exception to a particular error number. Then whenever that error will occur while executing the PL SQL statements, Oracle will automatically raise that exception, and then your control is going to go to the exception handling block. In that exception handling block, however, whatever you declare, you need to do when that exception, whatever your exception name, that exception, then some statement. So this is where you declare. So in explicit exception, where user defined exception we also call, in that case we declare an exception E1, and then we don't need to associate with anything. By just if and else condition, we can raise that exception, and we need to have a handler to handle that exception. So guys, this is all about exception handling. I hope you have understood this thing properly.